In the depths of the library of never-ending stories is a chronicle of the battles between hope and despair. Within the tomes of this ancient archive are stories and secrets not yet revealed, but with each adventure, a new chapter is written. So ruler, awaken and journey into. Welcome back to the Force of Will archive. One of the most famous characters in all of Force of Will has been Grimm, the fairy tale prince, and it's hard not to see why. Many, like myself, see Grimm as the mascot of Force of Will. When the game released in 2014 in the United States and Europe, Grimm was at the front of the line for the game's most unique mechanic, that is the ruler cards that call magic stones and perform judgment for powerful effects. From the very beginning, rulers were the ideal way for players to feel part of the game. You were meant to roleplay as these different avatars in the story, be the one casting the spells. And who wouldn't want to cast fairy tales? But just who is Grimm? What is his story? What makes him so beloved and iconic as a character? Well, the best place to start is at the beginning, at the very beginning, in the official lore for the Force of Will TCG. Grimm Glynn is the first character we meet. He is the main protagonist of the Grimm cluster, and he's by far the most open-ended rulers in terms of design. His ruler card functions like a storybook, allowing you to turn the page, so to speak, finding any of the many fairy tales in your deck with a simple discard. From his ruler card alone, you learn he's a prince, but we never learn about his parents. It's possible the creators of this character were using the title Prince to mean king or ruler, as is sometimes used in royal circles, with the likely intent being that this character is simply magical or ethereal in nature, and that's why we call him a prince, as you would find in any storybook. Regardless, at the end of the first episode of the Force of Will lore, we are introduced to Grimm, but there seems to be a time skip between this initial episode and the second episode of that lore, because in that pocket of time, Dracula has become a threat to Grimm's world, and Little Red, the wolf girl, has given Grimm his book of fairy tales. Now, Force of Will has existed for over a decade now, and I Spy, the company in charge of the FOW TCG, has revisited some of the older cards in the game. So at this point, we know that his fairy tale book is called Crimson Moon's Fairy Tale, and is considered a special regalia in the Force of Will world. Fans will notice that Crimson Moon's Fairy Tale is also the name of the first set of the Grimm cluster, which is a very nice retroactive touch by the game designers to maintain the connection to the game's history. Another card from this first masterpiece collection, Pilgrim Memories, depicts the next piece of the story, in which Grimm and Little Red embark on a journey to defeat Dracula. Along the way, they'll encounter fairy tales like Christie and Pandora, both of whom are said to be allies of the Will of Hope. They will also encounter a mysterious diviner in the Forest of Darkness, but that's going to be someone we explore in another video. Other fairy tales include the villainous Jeanne d'Arc, who is a variant of herself who persecutes and hates fellow humans, very unlike her source material character, who was herself a victim of persecution. But there's also Cinderella, who is a darker version of herself compared to other variants that we in the West are used to seeing, as well as Snow White, who uses apples as bombs instead of being her normal, innocent self like in more familiar stories. After freeing these allies, Grimm and Little Red make their way to Dracula's castle, Alvarez, where they confront the villain with Pandora's power. Dracula is defeated, though Grimm notices something is beginning to unfold. While staring at Dracula's dying body, Grimm thought about how he could finally return to his simple life in the castle and read books to his content. But then a thought suddenly came to his mind. Sometimes fairy tale stories have merciless consequences. Even though Dracula was defeated, Grimm still senses a dark miasma of his presence that lingers. Well, it's about time. The clear red voice echoes in its words. Grimm's body starts to fade and become transparent as if he were disappearing. Grimm, the chains of hope and despair are released thanks to you. Thank you, and goodbye. You have overused your powers. Sleep in the world of fairy tales. Not a lie. Well, let's begin. To the sky, and then march to the moon. As Grimm loses consciousness, he catches sight of a black tower extending into the sky. Little Red, who Grimm thought was his ally, tricks Grimm into sealing himself inside of his own storybook, the storybook that she gave him. In a twist of irony, Grimm has become one of the fairy tale stories he admires, and removed from his world alongside Pandora, whose hope is stolen, turning into despair. His powers as a ruler are passed on to his sister Lumia, who will use her restoration powers to save the narrator of fairy tales. Using her powers, she writes a story in the Crimson Moon's fairy tale titled Fairy Tale Grimm, Avenging the Darkness. While Grimm is trapped in his grimoire, Lumia rescues Pandora from the Alvarez castle, and the climactic battle of millennia unfolds. And because she was rescued, Pandora's box of hope is refilled, not with her own hope, but the hope of Lumia. Pandora uses this new power to summon forth Grimmia, an incarnate fusion of the hope of both Grimm and Lumia together, to fight alongside Kaguya against the forces of despair, resulting in the ritual of millennia and the reincarnation of Grimm into physical form. Both brother and sister then return to the Light Palace with Pandora close behind them, the world reset to normal once again. However, this is not the last time fans of Force of Will would see Grimm. Even though the events of Alice Cluster would see us leave Re-Earth behind, time passes behind the scenes. By the events of the Lapis Cluster, Grimm and Pandora marry, resulting in Millium, the new prince of the Light Palace. Grimm grows into an old king, still with the power of narrating fairy tales, but his powers seem more diminished as time has passed significantly. Regardless, old locations and old tribes in Re-Earth have come under the banner of the Light Palace. With the coming of Gil-Lapis, Grimm and the Light Palace are informed that they need to be readied, especially because his sister has gone missing, trapped unbeknownst to them all in the frozen casket. But what's more important to recognize now is that Grimm sends Millium on family business due to his old age, which is probably why we never see Grimm as a ruler again from this point on. Grimm's relationship with his son Millium is interesting enough to warrant its own deep dive, so let us know down in the comments if that's something you'd like us to explore. And while you're down there, please like the video if you've enjoyed it so far. It really does help the channel out. Now, Grimm's waning powers are even more on display when Valentina, in Priscia's body, comes from Ataractia and attacks the Light Palace, using an unsealed summoning of Mujdart to attack the castle. Here we see Grimm use his magic to amplify his voice and calm the citizens of the Light Palace as Valentina attacks. Upon her defeat at the hands of Glorious, Grimm and the others gather in the war room to plan their counter defense, which is dire, as the major villain behind the events of Lapis Cluster will soon arrive. At this point in the story, we have small vignettes and moments between Grimm and other characters like Lumia, Pandora, and Zero. We do not have a lot of time in Grimm Cluster to be fully explored, and what's clear in these moments are the feelings of genuine friendship that have developed between Grimm and all of these other characters in the span of time between the end of that cluster and the beginning of Lapis Cluster. This is really enlightening to see as a fan because it shows Grimm's character development in these early chapters of the story, which is something I really appreciate as a longtime fan of the story and this character. It's this friendship that helps Grimm lead as a king, but also gives him the human resources to help deal with the crises in Lapis Cluster as a whole. At the end of the climactic final battle in Lapis Cluster, Grimm stands on the restored Refarth Castle, the flying mythical castle of this world, joining the fight to the best of his ability. But ultimately, he succumbs to a fatal magical wound that would soon ignite with fire magic and explode, ending the story of Grimm and his wife Pandora, who joins his side as they die together. While the original Grimm dies in the final battle at the end of Lapis Cluster, other versions of Grimm show up at different points in Force of Will's story. For example, In the Rhea cluster, due to the manipulation of time, a vampiric version of Grimm is brought forth by the protagonist Rhea, and is restored to his human form when he encounters the inverted form of Lumia, Imel. He also appears in another set of events entirely, but as a shadow of the distant past, who encounters his descendant, Aristella, through a magical contract with the Water Moon, giving Aristella the power to bring forth his own fairy tales, just like his ancestor. All in all, Grimm remains a fan-favorite character because of his virtuous character, how he inspires all of those around him, his heroism. He has a unique and interesting set of powers that are unlike other protagonists from other trading card games in the TCG landscape. He also routinely comes to mind because fairy tales are one of the most popular lineages in Force of Will, meaning that a new fairy tale resonator or other support can suddenly turn Grimm into a competent ruler for competitive play. We had this most recently with Masterpiece number 1, Pilgrim Memories, where Grimm received 3 new support cards for himself, some of which have been featured earlier in the video. He gained the ability to tag with other rulers from the Grimm cluster, and even gained a regalia that allowed us to see Grimm as a G ruler for the first time in the game's history. But now I'll turn it over to you. What do you think of Grimm? Are you a fan of his story and of his character? Do you like that after all these years, Grimm still has such a long-standing legacy on the Force of Will TCG? I'd love to know what you think of this character down in the comment section down below. Here on Force of Will Archive, we think the story of Force of Will is interesting, engaging, and worthy of sharing with the world. But we need your help to do it. We need you to share this video with people you think would love this character as much as the rest of the community does, by sharing this video, giving us a like, and subscribing to Force of Will Archive. This is our first video on our channel, and we wanted to start off with a fan favorite character that we knew fans and veterans of this franchise would love, and it took a lot of time to bring this together. So give us a like, give us a comment, and subscribe. Until next time.